All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking author Karma Nayak's incredibly provocative thesis on a deep systemic shift. The core idea here? That history and modern democracy might actually just be grand illusions, and he proposes a pretty radical cosmic alternative. We're going to look at some deeply entrenched narratives today and, well, completely flip them on their head using the author's systemic analysis. If you've ever had that nagging feeling that the historical and political systems we live in are somehow rigged, this explainer is absolutely going to give you a lot to chew on. To help us make sense of all these complex ideas, we've structured our explainer today into 5 distinct sections, moving from the illusions of ancient history straight through to a revolutionary future economic model. So, starting things off with Section 1, History of the Victor and the Illusion of the Past. You've probably heard the phrase, history is written by the victors, right? Well, the author takes this a step further. It's argued that there's a deliberate political strategy of dehumanizing defeated native populations to justify the violence used against them. According to the text, when an invading group conquers an indigenous population, they don't just steal their land and resources, they literally try to steal their humanity. By depicting the original inhabitants as demons, giving them imaginary horns, fangs, or monstrous traits in their literature, the victors successfully mask their own atrocities as a sort of divine justice. It's a highly calculated propaganda tool designed to make future generations actually hate their own ancestors. To really hammer this home, the author uses a brilliant metaphor, contrasting predators and producers. Think about the lion. We are heavily conditioned to revere the lion as the king of the jungle. But if you look at it through a socioeconomic lens, the source argues this is purely manufactured PR. In reality, a lion produces absolutely zero value. It survives entirely by hunting and extracting from others. The true pillars of the ecosystem, and by extension society, are the elephants and the bulls. They are the producers, the laborers who actually create resources and carry the heavy burden of civilization. Essentially, we've been taught to worship the predator instead of the producer. And this isn't just some ancient myth thing. The analysis points out that this happens globally. Take Christopher Columbus or European colonizers in Africa. For centuries, textbooks painted Columbus as this brave explorer, bringing civilization to the Americas, right? But today, as indigenous voices are finally reclaiming their history, the narrative is shifting to reveal a legacy of mass murder and enslavement. Same goes for the colonization of Africa, which was famously framed as the white man's burden, supposedly a noble duty to civilize. The author uses these modern global examples to show that the demonization of native people is a universal tactic used by conquerors to hide their own predatory behavior. Let's move right along to Section 2, where this all builds into what the author controversially calls the historical karma audit, or the Vedic Epstein files. So, applying this karma audit, the author argues that heavily revered historical and mythological figures like Rama, Krishna, the Pandavas, and Indra ultimately faced tragic, karmic consequences for crimes that were masked as divinity. The source asserts that actions often justified as divine duty, or Raj Dharma, like deceitful killings in wars or marginalizing indigenous people, were actually severe historical crimes. And the universe, acting through the law of karma, kept the score. The analysis points out that these figures, despite all their celebrated victories, met incredibly tragic, lonely, or helpless ends. It is a stark reevaluation, suggesting that literally no one escapes the cosmic audit of cause and effect. Because of this, indigenous groups actually have a completely flipped perspective. While mainstream history demonizes certain figures, groups like the Gons, Ussers, and Bills revere them as great protectors and victims of systemic conspiracies. This isn't just an abstract theory, it's a living alternative history. For example, while much of the country celebrates the burning of Ravana's effigy, the Gon tribe actually mourns it, viewing him as a wise, nature-protecting ancestor. The Usser tribe mourns Mahishasura as a just, egalitarian king who was killed through deceit. And the Bill community honors Eklavya, not for his sacrifice, but for his immense self-taught talent, viewing the demand for his thumb not as some noble tribute, but as a deliberate plot to suppress indigenous excellence. Which brings us to Section 3, the illusion of modern Swayamvar, and how this deception operates today. Let's jump to the present day. According to the analysis, the terminology of a modern election is basically an illusion, much like the ancient Swayamvar. Now, the word Swayamvar literally translates to self-choice. But in the ancient epics, the princess didn't actually choose her husband. She was won as a prize by whoever had the sheer physical power to, say, break a giant bow. The author draws a direct parallel to modern democracy. We're told we have the power of choice, but the reality is that elections are overwhelmingly won by the political syndicates that possess the most financial power and media control. So the choice is largely a beautifully packaged illusion. The author forcefully argues that these political waves we constantly hear about are entirely manufactured by media syndicates, keeping voters acting like puppets on a string. What we perceive as a spontaneous surge of public support for a particular leader is, according to this text, a highly engineered product of media cartels dictating the narrative. However, the author does predict that a true, grassroots, real wave is coming, one driven by awareness and the demand for fair resource distribution. And this wave will supposedly make the current system of political and economic slavery as extinct as the dinosaurs. Moving on to Section 4, let's look at a glaring mathematical flaw in the system, the 40% paradox. This is where the numbers get really interesting. It is startling to realize how a party can secure absolute, unchecked power with just 40% of the vote. Under many current electoral systems, whoever gets the largest slice of the pie wins the whole pie, even if that slice is way less than half. The math shows a scenario where 40% of the electorate votes for a party, giving them a full mandate to govern. But that leaves a massive 60%, an actual supermajority of the population who explicitly voted against them. So this glaring 40% paradox essentially validates the author's claim that modern democracy is just a numerical illusion designed to keep these syndicates in power. When a minority can dictate terms to a majority that outright rejected them, the author argues we aren't looking at true representation at all. We are looking at a mathematical loophole that legitimizes minority rule. It really begs the question, is this an actual democracy, or is it just a brilliantly disguised system for resource capture? All right, now that we've agitated the problem, let's look at Section 5, the 1090 Cosmic Constitution, which is the author's proposed systemic solution. Before diving into the new economic model, the author establishes a crucial baseline. Nature is the only stable, ultimate truth. The acronym used here is BHAGVAN, representing Bhumi or Earth, Gagan for sky, Vayu for wind, Agni for fire, and Nir for water. In a world where history is constantly rewritten by victors and political truth is just manufactured by media syndicates, where do we actually anchor our reality? The author suggests we must anchor it in nature itself. These 5 elements are completely impartial. They don't discriminate based on caste, wealth, or power. Therefore, any true, fair system of governance has to be aligned with the universal, unbiased laws of nature, rather than the easily manipulated laws of men. Building on that natural truth, the revolutionary 1090 Cosmic Constitution is proposed. It's a radical system that uses an atom as a metaphor. Step 1 is the proton, a guaranteed 10% universal wealth right distributed directly to everyone to end extreme poverty and resource slavery. Step 2 is the neutron, representing stability, ensuring 90% of representation in governance, and the judiciary goes directly to the indigenous producers. Remember the elephants and bulls? It gives power to them rather than the predatory 1% elites. Finally, step 3 is the electron, the active defense. This is a strict rule of 0, meaning 0 tolerance for corruption, with massive penalties and asset seizures for those who break the public trust. It is a complete systemic reboot designed to distribute power fairly. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on regarding your own freedom and choices. Karma Nayak's analysis really forces us to look in the mirror and ask if the history we know and the democracy we actively participate in are genuine, or if they're simply shadows cast by the victors and the syndicates. The 1090 model challenges us to envision a world where producers are prioritized over predators. The big question is, now that you've seen the mechanics of the illusion, are you going to keep participating in the modern Swayamvar, or are you ready to demand a true cosmic shift? Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, and we'll see you in the next explainer.